Good afternoon. Welcome to Robots and Red Tape. I'm your host, Nick Shutt here. Happy to have Marty Fromuth on with us today. Marty, Marty, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. This is gonna be fun.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know if you don't mind though, if you would please just give the listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, your journey, and kind of how you got here.
Yeah, too easy. So I've had an incredibly non-traditional background. I've been one of those unique people that have bounced in and out of government and, also in industry. And I've tried to always live my life by the mantra of keep learning, keep learning.
Hmm.
I'm a problem solver at my core. And so, when you figure out there's a problem and an area you don't know that can try and help solve that problem, you keep going. So yeah, I started off my career actually in the government, in the military. And I had some really cool experiences there. And one of them was actually in the programming side. So I worked actually in the Pentagon working on the budgeting. And it was a fun time, and it was sort of my first foray into technology and into Congress as well, because there's such a huge part that Congress plays in the Defense Department's technology acquisition.
Hmm.
And so, I was really lucky while in that position to also do a study on how the Defense Department was actually investing in emerging technology, namely artificial intelligence. And that was a huge focus area in the 2017, 2018 timeframe. And
Hmm.
that's where I got my first real whiff of AI,
Okay.
and my interest in Congress. So I went directly from the government and the military space into Amazon Web Services, where I was doing artificial intelligence and machine learning programs and projects in support of the government.
Hmm.
And then, both through my time in the military and then at Amazon, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much policy and congressional lens to this. I got to
Hmm.
learn more. And so the Air Force said, hey, there's a really cool opportunity to bring you back on activation, because I was a reservist.
Hmm.
It was a program going and working with Congress and then working as a legislative affairs leader when I was done. So that's what I did.
That's
And I'm just kind of finishing that up right now.
Thank you for your service and thank you for spending so much time serving this country overall. It's really fascinating. It's phenomenal to have you on, and I'm really fascinated by your point of view. Especially as it relates to Congress, because I think a lot of people don't understand, and I think this is true for those both in like the government contracting industry and government industry, but more importantly, citizens, both civilians and citizens in the country that just don't understand the role that Congress really plays in emerging technology as it relates to, DoD. But like, let's just talk about tech overall, not specifically just AI, but then I'd like to talk a little bit more about AI as well.
Yeah, no, it's obviously becoming more and more of a topic, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's not necessarily new. I think a lot of folks kind of forget about that. There's the automotive industry,
Mhm.
electricity. Congress had a role in all of these kind of major shifts in technology adoption phases within our country. So it's not new.
Mhm.
Um, but there's such a unique place right now in the emerging technology space. And because it's so unique, it's really, I think, pushing on Congress to do more. And ultimately, Congress's objective is oversight,
Mhm.
oversight of, the rest of the federal government, but also oversight and protection of the American people by way of laws and regulations. And that kind of oversight can be really broad.
Mhm.
It can mean a lot of different things, and I think you're kind of seeing that again in Congress right now. I mean, it can be something as simple as publishing a letter.
Mhm.
Something a little bit more public, like having a hearing, much like they did with Facebook and on the Senate side a couple years ago, and their algorithms and models. Um, And it can be all the way to the most robust and most stringent, which is the establishment of new laws.
Mhm.
Congress has to do all of these things ultimately, um, for that oversight in both, balancing the need for innovation,
Mhm.
and kind of continued growth in these technologies, but at the same time, the protection of the American people. And I'm going to be frank with you, that that balance is not easy. And I
Mhm.
think, especially with the new and emerging technologies, they're so nuanced that it's really hard to figure out what that balance ultimately is. And it's not, by the way, just United States Congress that is, struggling with their role in the emerging tech space.
Mhm.
Um, they all of, a lot of international governments, NATO, EU, or pardon me, EU, et cetera, they're having the same kind of conversations, and they've been having it with the advent of, the internet.
Yeah.
Um, so it's just a continuation of those conversations and finding the balance between protection and innovation, and it's not easy.
No, no, it's I completely agree with you that it's absolutely not, and I appreciate that. I think, especially as you look at things like I know the EU came out with their AI guidelines a couple of months ago.
Yep.
I know the White House released something. I want to say it was last October or so, and having been, kind of behind the scenes and involved in writing a lot of this policy, what are some of the things that Congress is talking about, and what are some of the things that you've seen them take into consideration as they look to balance between, between safety, right, and then also on the other side, not stifling innovation? Because, like, and I think a great example of this is like the complete moratorium on facial recognition that the EU came out with, and using facial recognition as part of your business in general. And I understand that, like, 'cause that would be terrifying if you had private companies that, could set up cameras and, like, recognize your faces and things like that, but then also you think about false IDs, and the potential for that, and everything that goes into that, and then understanding that how the underlying data, can create biases at a higher level and so on. Like, what are some of the things that Congress is thinking about and talking about, and how do they approach something like this?
Yeah, I will say that I think a lot of the focus of Congress has been in other governments, but just speaking primarily on the U.S. government right now, Congress in particular, the focus has been a lot more on the safety and protection side.
Mhm.
It's not that they have been ignoring the innovation, but I think they've acknowledged that there's, a healthy industry right now. OpenAI, for example, is doing phenomenal things in the model
Mhm.
world, as are many of its competitors,
Yeah.
Anthropic, et cetera. But I think a lot of it has been on the protection side. And they have been looking at, I mean, there's been like 90 different, introduced pieces of legislation across both chambers of the House and Senate over the last handful of years. And the majority of them have been focused in on safety and protection.
Mhm.
Um, it's a fun and interesting topic about how to do that effectively within legislation.
Mhm.
This gets into that balance side, um, because you're trying to figure out. There's sort of like two, thoughts here, schools of thought. One is, do we have like an overall oversight of AI, and we create this new organization that just does like full, looking at AI, or do we establish it within existing infrastructure and structures and agencies?
Mhm.
And you kind of, I think the US has been one of those, they've struggled in trying to figure out which one of those they're going to take.
Mhm.
And I think that sort of impacted the safety conversation. And I think you're starting to see a little bit more of a shift more into the existing agencies and whatnot. So, for example, if you have AI that you are using within the financial sector, the FCC is going to now be charged with providing that oversight. And it's always sort of been the assumption, but you're starting to see the US sort of lean into that. But again, it's a lot of it's been on the safety side, with one exception, and that was the National Security Commission on AI.
Mhm.
Commission established by Congress, and it brought in a number of different, leaders within industry as well as national security and government, to look at, how are we investing in AI writ large?
Mhm.
pretty big topics. And out of that actually came some really important recommendations. I think it's like a 900-page report. I mean, it is a massive report that came out. There's been some pretty significant recommendations that came out of that on the innovation and investment side. But again, mostly Congress has been looking at that safety perspective. What's interesting, though, again, is the advanced technology space and the levers that Congress has to provide and conduct that oversight. I think you're starting to see that they don't always mesh or match well. Like those levers may not be what's needed to provide the oversight.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because Congress is doing some really unique things to try and get after that. So the Senate, for example, stood up an AI working group and held 9 different sessions last year.
Mhm.
That's not traditional.
Right. No?
That is a unique approach that Leader Schumer and Senator Young and Heinrich and Rounds all collectively got together and did.
Mhm.
So it was a unique approach, and you're starting to see more of those to have Congress really help with the emerging technology space.
Absolutely. So, I mean, you mentioned, different levers. So what are some of the levers that Congress has? And what are some of the ones that you like that they kind of wish they did have that they don't, or kind of, and what, yeah, let's start there.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, so there's sort of a sliding scale of when I've taught this before, right? Like there's sort of a sliding scale of capabilities or options that Congress has. Again, from something as simple as publishing a letter or having a meeting, to something as institutionalized as creating a piece of legislation and a law that people then have to follow. Um, the that sliding scale of options also comes with a sliding scale um, of challenges in being able to do them. So it's
Right.
really easy to publish a letter.
Hmm.
Really easy to ask for a meeting by yourself.
Hmm.
It becomes far more complicated and challenging if you want to conduct the oversight through a piece of legislation.
Hmm.
Whether that's, again, changing US code, or even asking for a report from an agency or something of the like. That requires a lot more consensus. It requires a lot more of the actual politics behind Congress. Um, in so much as this emerging technology space, where that tech goes across all of the different committees.
Hmm.
And that requires members who sit on various different committees and or the staff to be able to not just influence one committee, but influence many committees and many people. And so you start seeing some of those challenges. And it's not just the committees, it's then both chambers. And that's, I think, where the impact could be very large. I still don't think there's a solid understanding yet of exactly what legislation needs to look like. I think they're getting there. They're making some progress, but it's the getting everyone on board
Right.
across those committees and chambers. That is where it's going to become a lot more important. I mean, you have 4 people on this AI working group, 4 members of Congress and staff.
Hmm.
That's 4 out of 100.
Right.
So it requires a lot of work on the members' side.
Hmm.
Educate them, get them on board, build the politics around the emerging technology space.
Hmm. Absolutely. I mean, that's fascinating as somebody that, how has your perspective shifted and changed since, from obviously having worked in it and then seen it and observed it as a citizen as well? How has that changed your perspective on how Congress attacks and deals with these things?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one is those levers,
Hmm.
right? I think I had been mostly in the executive branch for the majority of my career in industry. I think there was a huge sort of assumption on my part of, well, Congress can just make laws.
Hmm. Hmm.
But there's so many other different tools that they have and options that they have. But I think one of the other big elements that really kind of opened my eyes coming from industry over into the congressional side and legislative side was the role of staff.
Mm-hmm.
And for those that are not necessarily as familiar, congressional staff comes in multiple different flavors.
Mm-hmm.
Um, got personal office staff, so the staff that ultimately supports the member and either their priorities in the district or their priorities within the state, if they're on the Senate side.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also have committee staff. And
Mm-hmm.
so, both chambers have committees and they have staff that ultimately runs and supports each of those committees. Um, their breadth is much different.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a personal office, their portfolio is massive.
Right.
You may have one person who ultimately has to deal with all of the foreign policy, national security, and veteran affairs. And they may also be taking on, the science and technology side or the small business side. On the flip side of that, in committees, they're allowed to be a little bit more specialized, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that comes at the cost of the breadth. And that can be a real challenge too. And so, the figuring out how to educate the staff too, because these are not simple topics. I
No.
mean, when we talk about safety and we talk about bias in artificial intelligence and generative AI, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it can get so nuanced and technical really quickly. I mean, you don't need to be talking about matrix, matrix multiplication, but you may need to go into this challenge of embeddings. I
Right.
mean, embeddings is a really technical topic in artificial intelligence. Um, how do you teach a staff? How do you help a staff member who's really honestly genuinely interested and wants to do the right thing? How
Mm-hmm.
an embedding impacts the bias of a model. And then
So
there's like the
how
central
does an
question.
embedding impact the bias of the model? Since you brought it up,
Yeah,
now I'm curious.
now you're yeah. So I mean, you know, uh, again, I'll try not to go like super nerdy here, but this is
Go
the
ahead.
fun part about
Yeah,
getting to
go
dive
ahead.
in. Yeah. So I mean, when you look at the way that a human brain thinks,
Mm-hmm.
we start off really young, just sort of observing different facts. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's a ball. I mean, our 2, 3 year olds, like they're just learning specific things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And over time, we start learning things like, what does that relationship between this object and this object mean,
Mm-hmm.
right? Something is hot, the fun example of don't touch a stove, right? Well, you start learning that touch has of something that is red hot means don't do that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, there's certain things even in math that you can actually do to start building that next level of analysis and association between different objects. In
Mm-hmm.
this case, that could be between different words or different chunks of words. It could be between a pixel and one image versus a pixel and another.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of next level of analytics, that kind of association and comparison, is something called embeddings.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so depending upon the ways in which you sort of classify your initial kind of first level of understanding, the embeddings can change too.
Mm-hmm.
Then can change what comes out of the model.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a really technical topic,
Yes.
and
Absolutely.
and and it gets into the training, why training data is so important, and
Mm-hmm.
why there should be a greater emphasis on that, and having a conversation about, like, a model is only as biased as what is put into it.
Mm-hmm.
So what should go into it? That's a policy conversation.
Right.
What should our actual data look like? Should it be what we want America to look like? Or should
Mm-hmm.
it be what America is right now? Like, that's a
Right.
difficult conversation, but it's
Yes.
an important one.
Mm-hmm. It absolutely is. And I'm glad you brought up a lot around how around educating members and educating their staffs and things like that. Because I feel like, especially especially today, with where we kind of are as a country. I mean, first, I have a lot of opinions about what training data should be like. I'm not going to get into all of that.
Yeah, it could be a whole hour and
That's
2 hour day kind of conversation. Yeah.
And I'd love to have that conversation because I find it fascinating, right? Always a fan of starting where you are, right? But especially when you start thinking about, the conversation that is going on right now and has been going on for some time around term limits and age of members, and things like that, and how many folks that are high up within Congress have been there since, like, we've been alive, and some of the concerns around that. And also, I don't know if you've ever had the privilege of teaching a grandparent how to use a smartphone, but I have. And and you start looking, and then you start realizing that these are the folks that are, while they may not be the only one there, and they have staffs, they're the ones that are making some of the decisions around how we approach things that were, frankly, when they were born, like science fiction, right? And now they're reality. How equipped is Congress to do that? And is there, and should we be concerned about things like that as well?
So it's a great question. And I mean, I can only speak from my personal
Hmm.
perspective. Obviously, this whole conversation is not, official and doesn't represent the United States government or Air Force.
Hmm.
But I think Congress writ large, the members and the staff, have a real interest in learning.
Hmm.
And I also think that you need this is the beauty, I think, of Congress, despite how frustrating it can be on the from the outside and watching Congress. And it's been a very interesting, few years from a congressional lens. A
Hmm.
lot of experts in this space have really, yeah, it's tested the limits of what they know about congressional, rules and procedures.
Hmm.
um, but I think one of the beauties of Congress is that they have they have to balance themselves, the constituents, the importance of the constituents and the needs of their constituents, the the breadth of what their constituents care about, and then have staff there to help them go into kind of depths of specific areas, or utilize external resources to help them get that depth. So one of the things, again, I keep bringing this up, but it's been a really kind of impactful and changing approaches that's happened over the last 18 months in artificial intelligence. But this AI working group,
Hmm.
those 9 different sessions and forums that they held, they brought in industry experts,
Hmm. Yeah.
and they learned and they asked questions, and they asked policy related questions, and I'm sure they asked technically related questions as well. But being that, like, they have that charge of looking broadly and looking for their constituents, they don't need to be specific technology experts. They need to know the questions to ask, and their staff needs to help them, and their staff is there to help them in developing those questions so they can come up with the policy perspectives. So it's a difficult thing. But I also think, if I could, this is not to toot my own horn, but like, to say that people like me, I think there'd be a great benefit to them to help translate between those communities, to help that conversation happen a lot quicker. Uh,
Absolutely.
and I think it's why that engagement with Congress from the industry side is also really, really, really important.
Hmm. And so it can be intimidating looking at engaging with
Oh yeah.
Congress, right?
Mhm.
Especially for folks like, and I mean, not to make it super personal, but folks like myself, the small business community, right? Where I'm in a couple of different industries. I have a couple of different businesses. How can and what can be intimidating is when you look at the disparity in resources between, somebody like myself and one of my companies, and let's just say a Fortune 500 company, one of these large companies that can throw millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars into lobbying and getting a certain perspective in a certain way. And you only need to look at how policies fall on certain things to understand the influence of things like that. How, as a smaller business, as a small business, how can we engage with Congress, both on, in as far as emerging technology is concerned, but then, also just like, broader technological issues, at large.
Yeah, no, I think I can completely appreciate the intimidation factor.
Hmm.
Uh, because I do think, especially if you're not sitting in Washington, D.C., or if you're sitting like I am right now in Northern Virginia, across the river can seem like such a large, can seem like such a huge leap. And they still seem kind of in this untouchable sphere. But
Hmm.
having worked over there and worked, in a personal office for a year, I can tell you that they want to hear from constituents. They want to hear from people, and a lot of them, if you go and ask them for a meeting, and typically it's on their website. I know that sounds so very simple, but thankfully it is that simple. There are representatives. There are senators. And honestly, most of the meetings that we took, many of them were from small businesses. Some of them were from the Fortune 500, larger companies too, but many of them were from small businesses. And they asked for a meeting and they got it.
Hmm.
I think this is where um, this is sort of a challenge. You don't know what to talk to them about either, because you think, oh, they're members of Congress, this is their staff. I must have this like incredibly important thing that I need them to do. And sometimes you may need that. I do think, going and speaking about the challenges that you're having, and it may require a little bit of research of, hey, what has been going on, a Google search or two, what legislation is out there perhaps, or floating around that could be helpful. They want to hear about those things because, quite frankly, especially if they're a small business within a particular district or state of that member,
Hmm.
you are their constituents. They
Hmm.
want to hear from you. They want to make you successful.
Hmm.
And so talk to them about some of those problems. The other thing is that you can come to them with kind of what you're doing too, because they want to brag about you. They're
Hmm.
really honestly, very honored and excited about what the members in their districts and states are doing, and they want to know. And they also want to know so they can look out for kind of trends and things that may pop up. Because
Hmm.
as staff, I would see certain, legislation come across our desk, and we'd have to recommend whether or not we should sign on to that piece of legislation or vote for it or not.
Hmm.
And if I didn't know that there was a particular constituent, wasn't like public knowledge, that could really benefit from that, I mean, we wouldn't, perhaps it would have impacted the way that we voted,
Hmm.
or recommended voting to the member rather. So those are really big things. I mean, there's some like, procedural things like, hey, right up front, tell them what you need, because that always helps build the trust and relationship with the staff. But honestly, it can seem intimidating, but they want to hear from you. They want to learn what your problems are, but what you're doing too. So I would just kind of recommend even just reaching out and seeing what happens. The worst that can happen is they can't schedule you for a little while, or they don't have time.
Right.
But it's a real thing that they want to hear from you. It's not just lip service.
Okay. Yeah. And I I absolutely believe you. I personally haven't reached out to our, any of my, congressional representatives ever, because I just haven't, because I don't really know what to say to them or what to talk about or like, and so like I appreciate that actually helps from an insider's perspective of what that's like. All I know is that, I think that Congress is complex and difficult to work things through, and I think that's a feature. right? Not a bug in the system, right? It's like it's supposed to be difficult to build consensus, which is but what some of the things that it's frustrating to be beholden, especially in the government contracting community, to Congress passing a budget. And then they can't do that, right? Like, and you see continuing resolutions or government shutdowns have personally cost me business over the years for a number of reasons, or there's an administration change and programs just get shut down. And that's happened to me as well. And so it is frustrating. But I know that many of them there are doing their best. I don't know if all of them, in my opinion, are, but I'm sure you can't speak on that at all.
I think you're right in that it is part of the system.
Mhm,
Even I'm always amazed at the brilliance of our forefathers.
mhm,
And the just I was born in Philly, so it shouldn't be super strange to think that I would be so excited about,
mhm,
what our forefathers did. But I look at even the way that Congress is built and was built. Article 1 of the Constitution. That is the central figure.
mhm,
Article 1 builds, establishes Congress. But the way that the two chambers are actually built is very different. There's a lot of frustration sometimes with the Senate for moving slow, but that's the consensus body. That's
mhm,
where the one person can change everything.
mhm,
Is on the House where they move very quickly sometimes, and sometimes it can feel very partisan because it's a majority organization. They
mhm,
operate off of majority. And so it is amazing to watch this balance between even just Congress
mhm,
and the two different chambers. But yeah, I mean, let's not kid each other. The appropriations and continuing resolutions have been, or the appropriations challenges over the years, and the continuing resolutions that have come, particularly this last year, have been really challenging.
mhm.
The federal government, the executive branch, and the legislative branch, in and of itself, has really, felt a lot of the impacts.
Mhm.
In an industry, you can't start new things.
Yep.
You can't start new projects, and that is a massive, massive impact on our ability to develop and honestly start making some real headway in some of these challenging emerging technology areas. Um, I don't know what the solution is there.
Mhm.
And I hate saying that because I'm a problem solver, like I said at the very
Right.
beginning.
Absolutely.
Um, but it's my this year will be very interesting. It's an extremely important year.
Mhm.
Um, the entirety of the House is going up for votes. A lot of key members in the Senate, several members of the Senate have already acknowledged that they're not running again. And so, it's going to be, not to mention the presidential election on top of
Right.
that. So it is going to be a very interesting year. And there's been a lot of thoughts about what that will mean for the appropriations.
Mhm.
Policy writ large? Are folks going to rush through to try and take advantage of an opportunity prior to, a change? Or are they going to hold on and wait? It's I think it would be hard to rush through given that, the chambers right now have different majorities from a political party perspective.
Mhm.
Uh, but it'll be interesting. And to say that it's not an impact or an influence is would be ill-cited. It absolutely will have a flavor. The question is, what's it going to look like?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I mean the appropriations process is, I'm sure, is just one. I know Congress is absolutely productive, and I think that the last couple of Congresses over the last 4 years have been quite productive in a lot of ways and have gotten a lot of things done, whether it's, the infrastructure bill and investing in a lot of the infrastructure here in this country, which is absolutely needed.
Mhm.
I think that the bringing chip manufacturing back onshore has been another
Yeah.
Huge win for us, both from an economic perspective, right? Because frankly, you think about like you know what I mean? Like it's like, the reason Apple can't make iPhones in this country. Yes, listen, it would cost more. But also we don't have the personnel and the staff and the internal capabilities in this country to make them at scale in the way that we need, right? We just don't. And so like it's going to create a lot of economic opportunity around things like training programs. I have been thinking about this for a while. I'd love to start something now around training people to manufacture chips in conjunction with Job Corps in some of these in one of these states here, right? Because I think that there's absolutely a market for something like that. Um, I would love to do that. I just don't have the bandwidth for another project.
We're very similar in that we kind of we've talked about this obviously. We like to do a lot of different things because we're
Mhm,
problem solvers. But yeah,
mhm,
you bring up chips, right? So to get back to the AI side of the house, I mean everyone is watching Nvidia and
mhm,
their stock skyrocket. And you're watching that because of the demand on the GPUs and the compute technology that's required for all of the models that you're seeing come out. I mean, trillion token models coming out of these powerhouses and the GPUs, the specific compute technology that
mhm,
is built, tailor built to to do that a mass of work.
mhm.
Um, they're becoming like they're becoming a very finite resource.
Yeah.
And so, it's only going to get more and more, important to have that kind of capability that we can, scale up as needed because it's not going to go away. As you're seeing all of these different organizations, and this is just on text. The cool thing is that you're starting to see these multimodal models coming out too. So you're seeing an image and an audio and text and all in one model and connecting, it all together. Um, Gosh, that's going to take a lot of compute too. So, it's going to be that's one of those areas where appropriations and policy, it's that interlocutor between the two. And where Congress has made some strides in helping move a lot of those major initiatives forward.
100%. And like all you and I mean, I'm here in Northern Virginia too, not too far from you. And so, all you have to do is drive out a little west to see all the data centers that have been built and continue to be built because all of those computers, all that compute power needs to be stored someplace, right? It all needs to be housed in very specialized environments. And that's just going to continue to skyrocket, continue to expand. And I don't know where it ends, but like, I completely agree with you from like it's going to continue to get built bigger. And I think like the car industry is a great example of, yeah, there's a lot of like BMW, Mercedes, these are all German companies, but every single BMW X series in the world is made in South Carolina, right? They're not made elsewhere. They're made here. And even if we have factories in this country that make NVIDIA's chips, like at least they're being made here and produced here, right? That'd be
I,
cool.
I'm a huge proponent of again kind of developing out the scale that is needed for the chip manufacturing. Yeah.
Absolutely. 100%. So before we wrap up, Marty, is there anything else that you think we should touch on or anything else you'd like to say in closing in and around Congress and its role in developing and building emerging technology markets in the country?
Yeah, so the last thing I'll say is that this is a movie that we'll see again, and I think we'll see again very soon. Quantum is on the heels of AI. And so, if you're in that space or if that is an area that you're looking to develop in, it's going to be another area that we're going to have to do this same sort of approach with Congress and helping them figure out how to maneuver across the different committees and jurisdictions. And that starts with, engagement and education. So if I, again, I'll kind of call to action this again, but please, reach out, and if you're in these spaces and the members and their staff are there to kind of hear.
Mhm,
And it's our ability to move forward in this space has to be a collective, approach across government and industry. Like
mhm,
that is how we get there. It can't be one without the other,
mhm.
because then the story is not fully told. So even if you're unsure what to talk about, get to a figure out kind of what their priorities are, but at least reach out and start the conversation, because it's going to help everyone get to the place that we need to from the emerging technology side.
Absolutely. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you again so much for coming on Robots and Red Tape. I've had a great time chatting with you.
Same. This has been fun. It's always good to nerd out and then at the same time talk like human policy things. It's like totally different sides of my brain. It's marvelous.
Hey, I'm with you too. I need to get back to that book you told me about because I have loved everything I've heard of it so far, and I'm just, it is what it is. I'll get back there, but I appreciate it. Thank you for listening to Robots and Red Tape, everybody.